In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of drawing a comic book page layout. I'm going to cover page breakdown, panel count, size, general guidelines, and just all of the rules. Hey, Walter here. Someone asked me if I could go over some traditional print comic page layout tips versus my standard WEBTOON stuff, so I figured why not. A lot of the stuff I talk about for WEBTOON is easily applied to traditional print comics. Heck, most of my WEBTOON knowledge is traditional print comic book knowledge repurposed for WEBTOONs, since print comics is where I started. A lot of this stuff is just universal sequential storytelling stuff. Some of these concepts also come from cinematography. It works for US comics, Euro comics, manga, manhwa, webtoons, whatever you want. It's all art, it's all sequential art, it's all groovy. So don't feel like you can't apply this across different medium. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So you may be starting off with a script, or you might just have a vague idea of what you're going to draw for that page. I suggest writing a script though. If not for the entire story or the entire issue, at least for the entire scene that you're going to be drawing. It's a lot easier to work out problems in a script than it is to just keep redrawing stuff. Redrawing stuff sucks a lot worse than rewriting stuff. And if you're drawing somebody else's script, I'd like to issue a warning about drawing a comic from a very loose script. You know, something that's kind of like the hero goes to the bar, they get into an argument, and there's a shootout, and the hero gets shot in the arm, and the villain escapes. If you try to draw a comic from a script like that, you're going to be doing a lot of extra work, a lot of extra comic writing work, actually. Some artists love it. Personally, I don't. Even when I write scripts for myself, I have it broken down into panels and pages. It's just easier to work out problems with pacing and page turns and just all that stuff. Trying to figure that stuff out while you're drawing pretty pictures is really freaking stressful. On top of that, you won't really know how many pages you'll have to draw, which means your schedule is going to be uncertain, which is my nightmare. And you won't know how much money you're going to have to charge because you won't know how many pages you'll be drawing. So I'd say be careful with summary style scripts. Some people call them Marvel style, but I don't think Marvel uses them anymore either. A more standard comic book script is going to look more like this. Page 1, panel 1, suburban neighborhood. Kid walks down the street with a basketball. Kid says, "I feel like I forgot to do something." Panel 2, the kid dribbles the ball. Panel 3, kid looks thoughtful and then is like, "Oh snap, I almost forgot to like this video." So when writing a comic script, one of the first questions that's going to come up is, how many panels should I put on a page? Now, there is no hard rule, but 5 is a good baseline to start with, but there's nothing wrong with just 1 panel or 20 panels. European comics tend to have more panels per page, but they also print their books larger than other markets. A big part of how many panels you can have is how much dialogue there will be and how big the letters are going to have to be so that it's legible for your reader. And you can get an idea of sizing by doing some experiments. Just draw some simple stick figures, letter it with whatever you want, and then print it. Can you read it? Is the lettering too big? Is it too small? Adjust it as needed. And if you can't print it to test it, then just put it side by side with a professional page and compare. You can find professional pages on Google or go to cbr.com and look at their previews. After a few pages, you'll be able to start to intuit the amount of size that you need to leave for lettering though. When in doubt though, always leave more space. Too much space is better than not enough space. Just as a quick aside, I also use 11 by 17 inch paper for when I'm drawing comics traditionally on paper. I will leave a link to the paper that I use in the description below. When I am working digitally, I work on a canvas that is 3300 pixels by 5100 pixels, which is about the same size as 11 by 17 at 300 DPI. But when we're talking about pixels, DPI doesn't really matter, but that's a topic for a whole different video. I also prefer Clip Studio Paint when I'm drawing my comics digitally, but Metabang is a good free option. There are a ton others. When you're breaking your story into comic book pages, try to think of each page as its own little story. Each page has a start, middle, and end. Of course, the end would be more of a teaser cliffhanger that would lead to the next page. A cliffhanger is an unresolved situation that will make your readers want to continue to the next page or issue, a book, etc., whatever, so they can figure out what happens. I think the term comes from old serialized stories when the story would end with the hero hanging from a cliff and the readers would have to buy the next issue to figure out if the hero lived or if they fell to their death. Now, it might not be possible to end on a cliffhanger for every page, but it's something you want to keep in the back of your mind while you're writing. I like my pages also to have a complete thought to them. An example example of like a mini story for a page would be someone comes home from work, walks inside their house and sees that their house has been ransacked. The end, you know, at least for that page. Story picks back up on page 2. I also like ending a scene at the end of a page, basically meaning I don't like jumping to a new location or a new scene in the middle of the page, and sometimes this is unavoidable, but if I have to do it, I try to make sure that at least it happens midway through the physical page. And this could just be, you know, personal preference, opinion on my part, but it just feels poorly planned if you have to switch locations in the middle of a page. Of course, there are exceptions, like if you're doing a scene where a character is quickly jumping from location to location, of course the scene's going to be changing in the middle of the page. Okay, so you have your script and now it's time to do your page. So what do you do now? The first thing you want to do is thumbnails. Thumbnails are quick sketches of panels so that you can work out any problems without spending way too much time drawing final pictures. It's like when you draw an illustration and you sketch out the entire image, make sure the poses, the elements, the backgrounds, the composition, all of that stuff works together. You wouldn't draw a face, ink it, color it, and then move on to the torso, ink it, color it, then move to the background, etc., because it could turn into a huge hot mess unless you're someone like Kim Jong-yi. But otherwise, you need to treat comic pages the same way you do your illustrations. You know, it's not 5 disconnected illustrations on a page, it's a single piece of sequential illustrated art. So work on it as a whole to create the best looking pages. And I really warn against drawing comic pages panel by panel for this reason. So my method for starting a page is to read a script and determine which panels are going to need to be the big panels, which ones will need the most room. The ones needing the most space are going to be complex panels that require a lot of detail, like establishing shots. An establishing shot is a panel that shows off a new location. They help the reader understand where the story is happening and where the characters are. Establishing shots are very important. Watch my panel type video for more information about different panel types. You may also want to make action panels bigger so that they have more impact. You know, that punch has more force because the panel is huge and in the reader's face. Another thing to be on the lookout for is dialogue. A panel could have a lot of dialogue, in which case you'll either have to leave a lot of empty space in the panel or make the panel bigger, or both. Once you know which panels need to be big and which ones can be small, you can start doing a quick panel layout. I usually keep my layouts pretty simple. I let the story and the art do the heavy lifting. So I use simple grids for the most part for my pages.
You just divide the page up into rows and panels.
Personally, I like to keep my pages around 3 rows, though sometimes I will split it into 4 rows. I prefer 3 rows just because it leaves more room for lettering. There's not really any rules to this. You can have 4 panels per row, 1 panel per row. You could have, you know, 1 giant panel. You could have 20 panels. Whatever you want, whatever works best for the story. All the panels could be the same size. Heck, maybe you even do a layout where there isn't really an established grid at all and it's just a crazy layout. There are some odd layouts that just aren't aesthetically pleasing, at least to me. One of them is cutting a page into equal halves or into fourths. It just looks kind of weird. But on the same hand, you can do thirds, sixths, and ninths, and it looks perfectly fine. This could just be a me thing, you know, try for yourself and, you know, decide if you like it or not. You don't have to get this right the first time either. If the panels end up being too small or too big or not the right shape, you can just change them, redraw them, whatever. That's the whole point of thumbnails. Super quick to try new things, experiment, and erase it if it's not working without having wasted a lot of time. Another important thing about panel sizes, besides being able to fit more detail and lettering, is that bigger panels tend to slow down the pacing. The big panel screams, "Stop, look at me, I'm a giant, I'm worthy of being stared at for 5 seconds," instead of the normal 2 seconds that most people spend on a panel. Also, the more panels you have per page will also slow down the pacing. It's going to make your reader process more information, so it's obviously going to slow down the vibe and the rate at which they read that page. Imagine if you wanted to draw this crazy fast-paced scene where this ninja's jumping all over the place before they finally land their blow. If you draw a bunch of panels, it's actually going to slow down the action versus if you just drew a single panel of the ninja jumping. And this could be a compromise needed for the story in whatever direction you want. It's just a good idea to be aware of the possible impacts of the panel choices you make. The opposite of a bunch of panels is just a single large panel for the entire page, which is called a splash page. Double splash page is a panel that spreads across 2 pages, and then of course there's fold outs. Anyways, you get the general idea. Now that I have a panel layout, I'll start drawing the art for each of these panels with just simple sketches, stick figures, you know, whatever you can do that is really quick. I really have to remind myself to draw fast and not really good at this stage, otherwise you're going to be wasting time. We're trying to work out, you know, storytelling problems, not draw really cool sexy biceps. Also really important here to think about the dialogue and the lettering. I go as far as including placeholders for lettering balloons when I thumbnail. All right, so let's stop for a little public service announcement. Lettering is super duper important for comics. It's so important to leave room for lettering. Lettering should not be an afterthought to the comic book artwork. Okay, end of public service announcement. A couple other things to keep in mind. Try to make the action move in the direction of the reader's eye movement. It just gives the drawn static movement a little bit more power, a little bit more dynamics. Example, American comic readers, they read from left to right. So I have a character running to the right. In manga, you read from right to left. So I have the character running to the left. Also, think about your reader's eye flow and how it's going to be directed by the composition of your panel art and also the lettering. Are you giving the reader's eye a clear path to follow from panel to panel, from balloon to balloon? And if you have the balloons running across the top and then suddenly throw one down at the bottom of the panel, it might be missed by the reader. Or maybe the reader does see it, but now they're going to skip the next balloon and then go straight to another balloon in the incorrect order. So it's traditional to keep the lettering balloons at the top of the panel, but sometimes it's not always possible. Another important aspect of layout is the 180-degree rule. Basically, this is keeping the characters facing the same direction for an entire scene, unless there's some reason for them to switch sides. If you don't, it can be a little confusing for the reader, and it can make it seem like characters might be teleporting around in a scene or maybe swapping places with another character. I explain this in really great detail in another video if you want more information about it. I even talk about when and why to break the rule. Another thing you can do with panels is break the panel border. A character fires a blaster and you have it break the panel border. It looks cool, it adds a lot of energy and depth, but again, it can be confusing. So in this example, you see the laser blaster is not only breaking through the panel border, but it's also breaking into another panel. So is this laser in the first and second panel also? Does it matter? Does it change anything? I don't know, but it's something to think about. When you break a panel border, that artwork's no longer existing on its own island. It's affecting all of the other panels that it breaks into. So it's something that you really need to think about, and think about if it's going to confuse your reader or break their immersion. You can also use irregular shaped panels or gutters. This can add a lot of dynamics as well. But again, you have to realize you're writing your own rules at this point, which is totally fine. That's what art's about. Just realize that no one else knows your rules yet, so they may read your comic incorrectly. If I do a layout like this, it's possible the reader would want to go into this panel next instead of the correct panel, which would be this one. Here's a panel layout that you should try to avoid called a left stack or stacking left. In this case, which panel would you read second? There's also the opposite of this, the right stack, which isn't as bad because it's more obvious which panel you're going to read first, second, and third. But there is a potential of your reader moving all the way to the bottom of the first panel and then seeing the bottom panel first before moving up to the top panel and possibly ruining your storytelling. Again, it may not ruin anything, it's just good to be aware of the possible outcomes of these choices. And I don't think readers are idiots. Most people are going to realize like, oops, I read that out of order, and they'll reread it in the correct way. But we should be doing our best to make sure that they read it right the first time through. Unless you want them to read it wrong or not know in which order to read it, but that's a deeper dive into advanced sequential storytelling stuff that we're not going to get into. Anyways, so those are the basics of print comic layout. If you found this video helpful, make sure you hit like. Let me know what additional questions you have based on this video in the comments. And if you want more information about the rest of the page process, I have another video where I show you the entire process from script to art to colors to letters for a page for my print graphic novel, Metal Shark Bro. And if you like this channel and you want to help support it, pick your favorite video, share it on your social media or on Reddit or something like that. Help me help everyone make comics easier, and be sure to like, link, love, hug, and hit that sub button for more sweet, sweet goodness. One of the best ways to learn is by failing. unless you're a doctor. But for artists, failures is a totes perfectly good way to learn. Catch you in the next video. Peace.